In Magic, tutors are pretty strong. This is because they allow you to search up a card in your deck and put it somewhere else, usually into your hand or on top of your library. Generally, they're powerful because they're so flexible. The strongest tutors lets you search your library for any card, but even tutors restricted to one or two card types, or even a creature type, tend to be pretty strong since they let you turn your library into a toolbox of sorts where you can choose the right tool for the job. However, not all tutors are so flexible. In fact, there are some that are incredibly restrictive because they only let you search up a card or cards with specific names. Some of these search up other copies of themselves, while others let you search up cards with completely different names. Despite these restrictions, some of these super specific tutors have performed pretty well in competitive Magic the Gathering, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Gigantiform. For 3 generic and 2 green, it's an enchantment aura with enchant creature and kicker for 4 generic mana. It makes the enchanted creature into a trampler with base power and toughness 8/8. And when it enters, if you kicked it, which means you paid that extra 4 generic, you get to search up another Gigantiform and put it on the battlefield. So this can grab other copies of itself, but it adds to the board while it does it, which is the case for most of these very restrictive tutors. It would be hard for them to be good if you just tutored the card up without adding to the board. That might work for Demonic Tutor, which can grab anything, but it doesn't work when you can only grab a specific card. As such, most of the cards on this list are capable of generating 2-for-1s thanks to their tutor ability, and that's certainly the case here. On its own, Gigantiform makes a creature into a threat, and if you've got that extra mana lying around, you make 2 creatures into major threats. Gigantiform's points all came in Standard, where it was played in ramp decks that ran a full 4 copies of it, and they frequently kicked it to turn their Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves into 8/8 Tramplers. However, Gigantiform doesn't have any top 8 since 2010. At number 9, it's Alpine Houndmaster. For a red and a white, it's a 2/2, and it's a little more flexible than the other cards on the list, because it can search up cards with 2 different names, because when it enters, you can search your library for a card named Alpine Watchdog and or a card named Igneous Cur and put them into your hand. This means you can grab just one of them, or you can grab one of each, so there's actually some 3-for-1 potential here. The bad news is, the creatures he searches up are super underwhelming, but the fact you get them effectively for free makes up for that in a big way. Also, when the Houndmaster attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of other attacking creatures, and this synergizes with his ability to search up those dogs, because that will inherently help you go wide. The Houndmaster and his 2 best friends saw some play in standard Winota decks. This guy and his companions were a good fit alongside Winota because she wanted you to attack with non-human creatures. Anytime one attacks, you get to look at the top 6 cards and put a human from among them onto the battlefield, tapped, attacking, and indestructible until end of turn. So the Houndmaster's dogs can trigger this, and should you hit the Houndmaster with the trigger, you can grab more dogs that can allow you to trigger Winota even more. While this didn't become a fixture in Winota decks, which mostly moved towards doing completely busted stuff like putting Agent of Treachery into play, it is pretty sweet that this guy and his dogs at least did a little something in competitive Magic the Gathering. At number 8, it's Elvish Clancaller. For 2 green mana, it's a 1/1 that gives your other elves +1/+1, and you can also spend 4 generic and 2 green and tap it to grab another Clancaller from your deck and put it onto the battlefield. Having a baseline as an elf lord is pretty nice, as she's likely to buff your whole board, and if you end up flooding out or the game gets late or you just have lots of mana because you're playing an elf deck, she can just grab another one to make your elf army even more impressive. The Clancaller was played in both Modern and Pioneer Elf decks, but doesn't have any top 8 since 2022. At number 7, it's Whisper Squad. For 1 black mana, it's a 1/1, and you can pay 1 generic and a black to search your library for another Whisper Squad and put it onto the battlefield tapped. 1/1s certainly aren't scary creatures all on their own, but being able to just grab other copies of itself from the deck without having to commit any resources in your hand to building out the board can feel pretty good. It was played in standard Rakdos Sacrifice decks that could get even more value out of all the extra bodies it could give you, like by sacrificing them to Priest of Forgotten Gods or Bolas's Citadel. However, it doesn't have any top 8 since 2020. At number 6, it's Growth Chamber Guardian. For 1 generic and a green, it's a 2/2, and it has Adapt 2 for 2 generic and a green. This means if it has no +1/+1 counters on it, that ability puts 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever 1 or more counters are put on the Guardian, you get to search up another one and put it into your hand. Certainly not the most impressive creature on its own, even with Adapt. It gets a lot better with that adaptability because it effectively says, draw a card, even when that card is just another copy of this Elf Crab Warrior. It can also allow aggressive green decks to keep pressure on the opponent, as it becomes a lot harder to run out of cards or creatures when you have a Guardian around, and indeed the Guardian's top 8s all came in standard mono green aggro decks. At number 5, it's Avarax. For 3 generic and 2 red, it's a 3/3 with haste, and when it enters, you can search your library for another Avarax and put it into your hand. You can also pay 1 generic and a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. Much like Growth Chamber Guardian, Avarax is not an impressive creature on its own, but grabbing another one that you can play and attack with on your next turn is pretty great, or at least it was great back when this card was originally printed. It was one of the most heavily played cards at the Onslaught Block Pro Tour, where it achieved one of its top 8s in a beast deck, which could get extra value out of the creature type, but it also appeared in Goblin and Astral Slide decks, which had very little synergy for the card at all. They were just playing it because it was so good on rate at the time. However, Avarax doesn't have any top 8 since 2004. At number 4, it's Say Its Name, the newest card on the list. For 1 generic and a green, it's a sorcery that mills 3 cards, and then you can return a creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. If we just stop there, that makes Say Its Name a good card for enabling graveyard decks, as loading your graveyard is valuable, and it even lets you get something back. But since it's on this list, you know that this sorcery has another effect that lets you tutor up one very specific card. In this case, you exile Say Its Name and 2 other copies of Say Its Name from your graveyard, and then you search your graveyard, hand, and or library for a card named Altenac the Thrice Called, and put it onto the battlefield. So it takes a little more setup than the other specific tutors we've seen so far, kind of, at least. If you're a really good graveyard deck, getting 3 Say Its Names into the graveyard is kind of going to happen at some point. In fact, they can just mill one another. It's also nice that if you happen to mill Altenac, the effect still lets you grab it and put it into play. And once you've jumped through those hoops, you get a pretty darn good reward in the form of a 9/9 trampling legendary insect with additional upside. Say Its Name quickly found a home in Pioneer Greasefang decks, which look to put powerful vehicles into the graveyard and reanimate them. Having a 2-mana way to get those vehicles into the graveyard is very important because it sets up Greasefang to do something nuts on turn 3. Say Its Name lets you set that up, but the deck also runs a single Altenac, so it has a pretty strong plan B, too. It's seen less play in Standard, but has achieved some success in Gruul Delirium decks. It's pretty active right now, and will almost certainly move higher on the list in the future. At number 3, it's Nissa Revane. For 2 generic and 2 green, she's a planeswalker that starts with 2 loyalty, and it's her first +1 ability that qualifies her for the list because it lets you search your library for a card named Nissa's Chosen and put it onto the battlefield. That first +1 is basically a more unique way to design a planeswalker that makes a token to protect itself, since it gives you a 2/3, but instead of it being a token, it's a card that you grab from your deck. And you don't have to worry too much about running out of them either, since when Nissa's Chosen dies, it goes to the bottom of your library, so even if you had one in your opening hand and you played it out on turn 2, you're still going to be in good shape. She also has another +1 that gains you 2 life for each elf you control, and a -7 that lets you search your library for any number of elves and put them onto the battlefield. So, obviously, Nissa Revane is very into elves, so it won't come as a surprise that she was exclusively played in elf decks in Standard between 2010 and 2011. It is very likely Say Its Name surpasses it in the future. At number 2, it's Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar. This is a super weird card, and not just because of its name. It also doesn't have a mana cost, which means normally you can't cast it. She's a 3/3 creature that can be cast for 1 red-black hybrid mana if you've discarded a card this turn, though. When she enters, you search up the Underworld Cookbook and put it into your hand, and you can also sacrifice 2 foods to have target creature do 6 damage to itself. Fun fact, while it took until 2021 for Asmorano and her cookbook to get cards, they were actually first mentioned way back in Limited Edition Alpha on Granite Gargoyle. Anyway, Asmorano goes super well with her cookbook, which is a powerful artifact that lets you discard cards to make food, and you can also pay 4 generic, tap it, and sacrifice it to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Obviously enough, Asmorano goes great in any deck that is good at discarding and making food, as does the Cookbook. However, they're both from Modern Horizons 2, which means the only 60-card formats they're legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. All of her top 8s have come in Modern, where decks bearing either her name or the name of her cookbook have been quite successful since 2021. These decks run lots of ways to get value out of discarding, like the recursive Oval Chase Daredevil. If you discard it to the cookbook to make a food, it comes back because you made that food. And there's also Inti, and lets you exile cards from the top of your library and lets you play them that turn anytime you discard cards. Basically, once you have a critical mass of sweet effects like that, both Asmorano and her cookbook are really strong. That's why she's been consistently seeing play in the format since 2021, and it's not going to stop, but it's highly unlikely this Underworld chef will ever catch the #1 card on the list, which is Squadron Hawk. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 1/1 flyer, and when it enters, you can search your library for 3 cards named Squadron Hawk and put them into your hand. You can already see that this is more powerful than the other effects, because the Hawk lets you grab up to 3 copies of itself right away. That basically makes this a 2-mana 1/1 flyer that draws you 3 cards, and that's pretty insane, even when the other cards are also just 2-mana 1/1 flyers. This card was so strong that one of the best standard decks of all time, Cawblade, was partly named for it, with the caw referencing the sound that a hawk makes. These decks ran tons of super strong cards that gave you card advantage, including the Hawk and Stoneforge Mystic, the latter being where the blade part of the name comes from. The Mystic lets you tutor up any equipment, and it can also let you put it into play cheaply, and it just so happens that having a bunch of 1/1 flyers is a pretty good way to take advantage of equipment, especially when it's something like Sword of Feast and Famine, which gives you a powerful effect when the equipped creature hits the opponent. Ultimately, many parts of Cawblade, including the Mystic, had to be banned out of Standard and Extended, and it was later preemptively banned in Modern, and this slowed the Hawk down in a big way, but it didn't stop seeing play entirely. In Modern, it was played in Stoneforge Mystic list versions of Cawblade, and later it caught on in a big way in decks that could use Martyr of Sands and Proclamation of Rebirth to gain absurd amounts of life. The Martyr lets you reveal white cards in your hand to gain life, and Squadron Hawk made sure you had plenty of those. It's also been played in decks like Spirit Aggro and Death and Taxes. It also put up top 8s in Legacy, a format where the Mystic was never banned, so the core of the original Cawblade deck was intact. It's also a fixture in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. It used to see play in White Weenie and Boros aggro decks in the format, but more recently it helped spawn the Caw Gates deck. These decks use a similar strategy as the old school Cawblade decks did, get a Squadron Hawk in play and make it a good attacker, only instead of equipment, these decks are loaded up with lands with the Gate subtype and look to take advantage of them with Basilisk Gate. Buffing Squadron Hawk with the Gate every turn ends the game pretty quickly. So, Squadron Hawk is still highly active in Pauper and sees occasional play in Modern, and it has a huge lead on everything else on the list, so it's hard to imagine there will ever be another super specific tutor that surpasses it. That does it for this MTG Top 10. If you like searching up cards with specific names, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you haven't already subscribed, consider doing so. And if you want to catch up on more than 860 other MTG Top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.